Okay, this is part 2 of your notes for today. This is about trig word problems. And these trig word problems, when we draw the picture, we're always going to have a right triangle. Now, not all, but a good portion of these problems, they're going to use two phrases that you need to know what they mean. The first one is angle of elevation. And the angle of elevation is this angle here. It's always the bottom right one. Okay, so if they talk about the angle of elevation, they're referring to that one. The second one is the angle of depression. So it's pretending that you have got this imaginary line drawn here that is going to be parallel to this bottom line here. And this angle here is your angle of depression. That's not sad, it's just going down. And when we do trig, we can't solve a problem with the angle outside of the triangle. But because this top line and bottom line are parallel, these two angles here also form a right angle. So if you know one, you can subtract it from 90 to get the other. Okay, let's try these in some problems. So we're all going to have right triangles. So first one, a ski slope is 550 yards long. Well, the slope is the actual part you're skiing. So this is 550. And if it makes you feel better, let's add a skier. Okay, it's got a vertical drop of 130. So this is 130. Find the angle of depression for the slope. So the angle of depression, as we now know, is outside of the triangle. It's right here. But we can't solve for that, so what we're going to do is we're going to solve for y instead. And when we're done, we know x and y add to 90, so we'll subtract it from 90, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so looking at y, 130 is adjacent and 550 is hypotenuse. So that is our cosine. So we're going to say the cosine, write that so we can read that. The cosine of our angle, which is y, equals adjacent 130 over hypotenuse 550. Now, besides doing the trig word problems, I want in this section you also get better about putting everything in your calculator and not having to write everything down. So to find y is going to be the inverse cosine of this, right? So in your calculator, you're going to do second cosine and then in parentheses 130 divided by 550. Now, some of your calculators will automatically put a parentheses there, some will not, so you just kind of have to look and see. Okay, so to the nearest whole degree, because it's an angle measure, we get 76 degrees. But that's not what we want. We wanted x. So to get x, it's outside the triangle, so we do 90 minus 76, which is 14 degrees, which is not a lot, but most of us aren't insane skiers and don't want to plummet to our death. Okay. A tree is 50 feet high. So here's the tree. This is 50 and cast a shadow that's 62 feet long. We need to find the angle of elevation of the sun. Well, the angle of elevation is right here. Now, why did I put 62 on the ground? Well, if you're outside and you're looking at your shadow appears on the ground. It's not up here at an angle. Okay? Okay, so looking at x, 50 is opposite, 62 is adjacent, so that's going to be tangent. So the tangent of y equals opposite 50 over adjacent 62. Now let's put this in our calculator. So you're going to hit y equals, remember you're going to hit the second button, and then the tangent button, and then in parentheses, 50 divided by 62. Now, there are some of you that have the smaller calculators that you have to do the number first, so you're going to do 50 divided by 62, then second tangent, but I think you guys know who you are. So when you solve that to the nearest whole degree, you get 39 degrees. All right. After flying at an altitude of 9 kilometers, an airplane starts to descend. Well, if it's descending, it's going down. So here's our airplane going down. altitude of 9 kilometers. Altitude means height, so this is 9. Its ground distance, well, that's got to be on the ground, is 175. We want to find the angle of depression, which is outside the triangle here. Now, when we solve trig, we can't find that angle, but we can find the angle inside, which is right here. All right, so let's solve for y. Looking at y, this is opposite, this is adjacent, so this is tangent. So the tangent of y equals opposite 175 over adjacent y. So y is going to be the inverse tangent of that. So in your calculator, second tangent, 175 divided by 9, and you get y equals 87 degrees. But remember, that's inside the triangle. The angle of depression you want is outside. So you're going to do 90 minus 87, which is just 3 degrees, which is small, but that's good. You don't want your airplane to be in a nosedive. Okay, trolley car. Get your right triangle again. Rising, so that means it's got to be at the bottom of the hill and going up. Rises vertically 40 feet. Vertical is up and down. Horizontal is 630. We want the angle of elevation. Angle of elevation is always the bottom right angle. So looking at x, 40 is opposite, 630 is adjacent, so that would be tangent. So the tangent of x equals opposite 40 over adjacent 630. So in your calculator, second tangent, 40 divided by 630, you get 3.6, but running to the nearest whole degree, which is just 4 degrees, which again is small, but trolley cars aren't that strong. They're not going to be able to do that steep of a hill. Or do you really want to go on something on that steep of a hill? Unless you're on a roller coaster. Okay, a ladder is leaning against a house and makes... Now, these angle of elevation and angle of depression, those happen a lot, but not in every problem. So let's look at somewhere that doesn't even talk about it. We don't need it. A ladder is leaning against a house. So let's draw your house. Make sure you put a chimney so Santa can get him in. Here's your ladder. Okay, so a ladder makes an angle of 55 degrees with the ground. So here's your ladder. Over here is the house. Down here is the ground. So here is where 55 degrees goes. The foot of the ladder, which is the bottom, is 6 feet from the foundation of the house. So here's the bottom of the ladder, here's the bottom of the house, and this is 6 feet. Okay, now it says what is the length of the ladder. So what we're solving for is our x. So looking at 55, 6 is adjacent, and x is hypotenuse, which is cosine. So we have the cosine of 55 equals adjacent 6 over hypotenuse x. Okay, now let's practice putting these in our calculator. Think about this for a second. This is going to be a proportion. You cross multiply. So you're going to have 6 equals the cosine of 55 times x. So to solve, you're going to do 6 divided by cosine 55. So in your calculator, you're going to hit 6, the divided by button, and then in parentheses, cosine 55. So see what that gives you. It should, now this is side length, so we're around to the nearest hundredth, so it should give you 10.46 feet. Okay, Bob is flying a kite. So here's Bob. Okay, now when you fly a kite, the string doesn't go straight up. It goes at an angle. So here's your string. Okay, so that means this is where your kite is. Okay, the string makes an angle of 55 degrees with the ground. So here's the string. The ground is where Bob is standing, so this is 55 degrees. If Bob is standing 100 feet, so here's Bob, from the point on the ground directly below the kite. Well, here's the kite, so the point on the ground directly below it is here. And here's Bob, and he's 100 feet from that point. This is 100. How long is the string? Well, here's the string, so that's what we're trying to find. So looking at 55, 100 is adjacent, x is hypotenuse, so that's going to be your cosine. So the cosine of 55 equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So think about when you cross multiply. This is going to be 100 equals cosine of 55 times x. So to solve, you got to divide. So 100 divided by the cosine of 55, which I typed incorrectly, is 174.34. Oh, and a label, feet. And again, I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth because it's a side. Angles are rounding to the nearest whole degree. It's always going to be the same. Okay, the angle of elevation from a point on the ground to the top of the cliff is 38 degrees. So I'm going to draw my cliff. The angle of elevation is 38 degrees. It always goes in the bottom right for elevation. If the point, here's the point on the ground, is 80 feet from the base, well, the base of the cliff is the bottom, so this is going to have to be 80. We want to know how high the cliff is. Well, here's the cliff, so what we're solving for is our x. Okay, so looking at 38, x is opposite, 80 is adjacent, so that's tangent. So the tangent of 38 equals opposite x over adjacent 80. So how are we going to solve this? Cross multiply, but watch, this one's different. 1 times x is x, and then we get the tangent of 38 times 80. Oops, 80. So now this one you're not dividing, this one you're multiplying. So 80 times the tangent of 38 to the nearest hundredth, because it's a side length, would be 62.50 feet. And yes, you need the 0, because I'm going to count off this semester if you're not rounding correctly. I was generous last semester, but no more. You got to learn how to round. Okay. From the top of the tower, the angle of depression to a stake on the ground is 72 degrees. Okay, so here is my tower. This isn't a great picture. Okay. So the top of the tower, the stake on the ground, here's the stake. The angle of depression is 72. Well, we know from the last page, or the front side, angle of depression is right here. The top of the tower is 80 feet above ground. So here's the top of the tower, here's the ground. This has got to be 80. How far is the stake to the foot of the tower over here? So this is our x. Now when we solve, we cannot solve with that 72. We have to find the angle inside of the triangle. So I'm going to do 90 minus 72, which is 18. So this angle in here is 18 degrees. Now we can do our trig. So looking at 18, this is opposite, this is adjacent, so that's going to be tangent. So the tangent of 18 equals opposite x over adjacent 80. Okay, think about what happens when you cross multiply. 1 times x is x, and then you're multiplying these two. So 80 times the tangent of 18 gives you 25.99 feet. Okay, before we do the last one, I want to mention something. I said at the beginning this top line here is parallel to this bottom line here. So if they're parallel, these two angles here are alternate interior angles. So if they're alternate interior, they have to be congruent, right? So the angle of depression is always going to be the same measurement as the angle of elevation. So when you go to solve, if you know this is 72, you could just write in this angle as 72 and solve that way. The only thing I will tell you is I'm going to expect you to draw a picture. And in the picture, if the problem says angle of or depression, I want you to mark that 72 outside of the picture, because The reason I'm having draw the picture is testing that you can set up the picture and that you know the vocabulary of which one is the angle of depression. All right, I want you to pause the video and try number 9 on your own. If you get stuck, look at the front of this paper because there's one just like it there. All right, here is the answer. So the tree is 40 feet high, the shadow is on the ground, you're finding the angle of elevation, which is x. 2 things to point out, or 3 things. 1, to solve for this, remember it's because you're solving for an angle, this is when you're using the inverse. 2, because it's an angle, I round to the nearest whole degree. Now on this problem, it wasn't that confusing. However, there's one on your homework that a lot of people label the wrong part. As you're labeling this, the 2 legs here and here have to be shorter than the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse has to be the longest side. So if you are labeling your triangle, you say, okay, well, this one I know is, I don't know, this one down here I know is 70, okay? And then they give me another piece of information. I say, well, that one's 40. You don't even need to solve the problem to know this is wrong. This hypotenuse has to be the longest, and if you've got 40 there, it doesn't work because it's shorter than the 70, so something's got to be wrong, so readjust your numbers. If you try and do this in your calculator, you're going to end up with an error message because it's not possible. Okay, video's over. Pick up your homework from the substitute, and then we will go over this in class next time.